Snow fell softly outside the tall windows of the Park Avenue apartment. Hei-yun sat by the window, watching the white flakes dance in the evening light. The 12-year-old girl loved winter in New York City, especially on Christmas Eve, when the whole city seemed to sparkle with magic. "Hei-yun, come help me with these boxes," called her grandmother, Yoo-jin, from the living room. The old woman stood next to their Christmas tree, surrounded by several old wooden boxes. Each box had beautiful Korean patterns carved into its sides. Hei-yun walked over to her grandmother, her soft slippers making no sound on the wooden floor. The apartment smelled of cinnamon and pine needles. Christmas lights twinkled on their tree, making shadows dance on the walls. "What's in all these boxes, grandmother?" Hei-yun asked. She helped Yoo-jin lift one of the smaller boxes onto the coffee table. Yoo-jin's eyes twinkled as she opened the first box. "These are very special treasures I brought from Korea many years ago. I think you're old enough now to understand their magic." Inside the boxes were beautiful decorations, glass ornaments that caught the light, delicate paper snowflakes, and tiny wooden figures. But in the last box, wrapped in red silk, was something that made Hei-yun gasp. It was a nutcracker, but unlike any she had ever seen. He wore a royal blue uniform with gold buttons, but his jacket had patterns that reminded her of traditional Korean designs. His face was painted with care, and his eyes seemed to hold a hint of wisdom. "This nutcracker is very special," Yoo-jin said, placing it gently in Hei-yun's hands. "He came to me when I was your age, on a snowy night much like this one." Hei-yun turned the nutcracker carefully in her hands. "He's beautiful. But why does he look different from other nutcrackers?" "Because he belongs to both worlds, just like you." Yoo-jin smiled. "He carries the magic of our Korean heritage and the wonder of this new world we call home." As they decorated the tree together, Yoo-jin told Hei-yun stories about winter celebrations in Korea. She spoke of festivals where lanterns lit up the night sky and traditional songs filled the air. Hei-yun listened carefully, placing each ornament with care, while keeping one eye on her new nutcracker. Later that evening, when her parents came home from work, they all had dinner together. Hei-yun's mother made kimchi stew, while her father brought home a chocolate Yule log from the fancy bakery down the street. The mixture of Korean and American Christmas traditions made Hei-yun feel warm inside. Before bedtime, Hei-yun placed the nutcracker on a special shelf near the Christmas tree. The moonlight coming through the window made his golden buttons shine. "Remember," Yoo-jin said as she tucked Hei-yun into bed, "Christmas Eve is when magic is strongest. Keep your heart open to wonder." Hei-yun nodded sleepily, thinking about her grandmother's words. As she drifted off to sleep, she could have sworn she saw the nutcracker's eyes twinkle in the moonlight. Outside, the snow continued to fall over New York City. The street lamps cast a warm glow on the white blanket covering the sidewalks. Through her window, Hei-yun could see the lights of passing cars and hear the distant sounds of the city preparing for Christmas. Little did she know that this Christmas Eve would be different from any other. As the clock ticked closer to midnight, magic was already starting to stir in the quiet apartment, and her nutcracker held more secrets than she could imagine. The old grandfather clock in the living room struck midnight. Hei-yun opened her eyes, unsure what had woken her. The apartment was dark except for the soft glow of Christmas lights from the tree. Something felt different in the air. She climbed out of bed and walked to her bedroom door. The wooden floor felt unusually cold under her feet. As she stepped into the hallway, she noticed that everything seemed bigger than usual. The pictures on the walls towered above her, and the ceiling seemed much higher than before. When she reached the living room, Hei-yun stopped in amazement. The Christmas tree had grown enormous, reaching all the way to the ceiling. The ornaments her grandmother had helped her hang were now as big as beach balls, glowing with their own light. "How is this possible?" she whispered to herself. The snow falling outside the windows looked different too. Each snowflake was the size of a dinner plate, sparkling with rainbow colors as they fell past the window. Then she heard it, a strange scratching sound coming from near the tree. Hei-yun turned toward her Nutcracker on the shelf. As she watched, something incredible happened. The Nutcracker began to move. First, his painted wooden arms became real. Then his legs started to change. His whole body grew until he was as tall as a grown person. His wooden face transformed into that of a young man with kind eyes. He wore the same blue uniform with Korean patterns, but now it sparkled with real gold threads. The Nutcracker bowed to Hei-yun. "I am Prince Jai-ho," he said in a gentle voice. "Thank you for giving me a home on your shelf." Before Hei-yun could answer, they heard more sounds, squeaking and scratching noises coming from behind the furniture. Dark shapes moved in the shadows. Red eyes glowed in the darkness. "They're coming," Jai-ho said, drawing a sword that gleamed in the Christmas lights. The Mouse King and his army always try to spoil Christmas magic. The squeaking grew louder. From behind the couch came dozens of mice, each one as big as a small dog. They wore tiny armor and carried small swords. Leading them was the biggest mouse of all, the Mouse King. He wore a crown made of golden cheese and carried a sword that sparkled with dark magic. "Quick," Jai-ho said to Hei-yun. "Stand behind me. The Mouse King has been trying to steal Christmas magic for hundreds of years." The Mouse King stepped forward. His voice was rough when he spoke. "Hand over the magic Nutcracker staff, Jai-ho, or we will take it by force." Hei-yun noticed that Jai-ho held not just a sword, but also a beautiful staff decorated with Korean patterns. It glowed with soft blue light. "This staff protects the magic of both worlds," Jai-ho said firmly. "You will never have it, Sangmin." The Mouse King, Sangmin, raised his sword. "Then we fight. Attack." The mouse army charged forward. Jai-ho stood ready to defend Hei-yun and the magic staff. Around them, the apartment seemed to grow even larger. The Christmas tree towered like a skyscraper, and ordinary furniture looked like giant buildings. Hei-yun knew this would be a night she would never forget. As she watched Jai-ho prepare to face the mouse army, she realized that her grandmother's words about Christmas Eve magic had been true all along. Now she just had to help Jai-ho protect it. The battle began in the magical living room. Jai-ho moved quickly, his sword flashing as he fought against the mouse soldiers. The Christmas lights reflected off his blade, creating beautiful patterns on the walls. Hei-yun watched from behind a giant table leg. The mouse army surrounded Jai-ho, their tiny swords pointed at him. The Mouse King, Sangmin, directed his troops from the back, his golden cheese crown glowing in the dim light. "You cannot win, Jai-ho," Sangmin called out. "There are too many of us and only one of you." Jai-ho stood firm, holding both his sword and the magical staff. "Numbers do not matter when protecting something important," he said, blocking attacks from 3 mice at once. Hei-yun wanted to help. She looked around and saw her slipper, now as big as a small boat, lying nearby. An idea came to her mind. While Jai-ho kept fighting, Hei-yun carefully picked up her slipper. The mouse soldiers were so busy with Jai-ho that they didn't notice her. She aimed carefully at Sangmin, who was still shouting orders to his army. "Now," she whispered to herself and threw the slipper as hard as she could. The slipper flew through the air and hit Sangmin right on his head, knocking his cheese crown off. The Mouse King stumbled backward, surprised by the attack. "Who dares?" he shouted, looking around angrily. "I do." Hei-yun stepped out from her hiding place. "Leave Jai-ho alone." The mouse soldiers stopped fighting and turned to look at her. Jai-ho used this moment to raise his magical staff. Blue light poured from it, making the mouse soldiers step back. "A human child who can see us," Sangmin said in surprise. "That's impossible." "Nothing is impossible on Christmas Eve," Jai-ho replied. He moved to stand next to Hei-yun, especially when someone believes in magic. The blue light from Jai-ho's staff grew stronger. The mouse soldiers began to retreat, their tiny boots making scratching sounds on the floor. Some dropped their swords and ran away. Sangmin looked at his running army in anger. "Come back, you cowards," he shouted, but the mice kept running until they disappeared into the shadows under the furniture. Left alone, Sangmin pointed his sword at Jaiho and Haeyun. "This isn't over," he said. "The magic will be mine someday." Then he too ran away, leaving his golden cheese crown behind. Haeyun picked up the tiny crown. It was warm in her hands and smelled like old cheese. "We did it," she said happily. Jaiho bowed to her. "You were very brave," he said. "Not many would dare to throw a sliver at the Mouse King." "What will he do now?" Haeyun asked, looking at the shadows where the mice had disappeared. "Sangmin will hide until he can think of another plan," Jaiho said. "But for now, we are safe, and because you helped save the magic, I can show you something special." "What is it?" Haeyun asked excitedly. Jaiho smiled and held out his hand. "Would you like to see where Christmas magic comes from? I can take you to a place where winter dreams come true." Haeyun looked at his outstretched hand. Through the windows, she could see the giant snowflakes still falling over New York City. Everything felt magical and new. She knew that by taking his hand, she would start an amazing adventure. Without hesitation, she placed her hand in his. "Yes," she said. "I want to see everything." As Jaiho held Haeyun's hand, the magical living room began to fade around them. A gentle wind swept them toward the large windows. To Haeyun's amazement, they passed right through the glass, as if it were made of air. They floated down to the snowy streets of New York City. Everything was quiet and peaceful. The street lamps created warm circles of light on the fresh snow. No cars drove on the roads, and no people walked on the sidewalks. "Where are we going?" Haeyun asked, watching her feet glide above the snow without leaving footprints. "To Central Park," Jaiho replied. "It becomes a special gateway on Christmas Eve. The park holds ancient magic that connects our world to the land of sweets." They moved through the city like two snowflakes in the wind. The buildings seemed to bow as they passed. Store windows filled with Christmas displays sparkled more brightly than usual. Even the traffic lights appeared to wink at them. When they reached Central Park, Haeyun gasped. The park had transformed into something extraordinary. The trees wore coats of diamond-like frost. The paths glowed with soft blue light. Frozen fountains had turned into crystal sculptures. "This is amazing," Haeyun whispered. She reached out to touch a nearby tree. Its branches made sweet musical sounds when she touched them, like tiny silver bells. Jaiho pointed to the frozen lake in the distance. "Watch this," he said. He waved his magical staff, and suddenly all the lampposts in the park changed color. They now shone in rainbow colors, making the snow shine like precious gems. As they walked through the magical park, Haeyun saw wonderful things. Squirrels with silver fur danced in the trees. Snow angels came to life and flew through the air. Ice sculptures moved and bowed to them as they passed. "Look there," Jaiho said, pointing to a large oak tree ahead. Its trunk was wider than any tree Haeyun had ever seen. "That's the gateway tree. It will take us to the land of sweets." They approached the massive tree. Its bark sparkled with frost, and its branches reached up into the night sky, like arms stretching toward the stars. At its base was a door made of light. "Are you ready?" Jaiho asked. "The land of sweets is different from anything you've seen before. It's where all winter dreams come true." Haeyun looked back at the magical park. The rainbow lights danced on the snow, and the musical trees played their gentle song. She thought about her grandmother Yujin, who had given her the Nutcracker. Now she understood why her grandmother had talked about Christmas Eve magic. "I'm ready," Haeyun said confidently. She held Jaiho's hand tightly. Jaiho touched the door of light with his staff. The door slowly opened, releasing warm golden light and the smell of sweet treats. Haeyun could hear beautiful music coming from inside. "Welcome," Jaiho said with a smile, "to the place where Korean and Western magic meet. A world of endless winter wonders awaits you." Together, They stepped through the glowing doorway. The gateway tree seemed to bow as they entered, its branches creating a curtain of light behind them. Hei-yun knew that her real adventure was about to begin. When Hei-yun stepped through the glowing doorway, she entered a world more beautiful than anything she had imagined. The land of sweets spread out before her like a magical painting come to life. The sky above sparkled with stars that looked like sugar crystals. Gentle snowflakes danced in the air, but they were warm to the touch and tasted like cotton candy. The ground beneath their feet was a path made of perfectly smooth white chocolate. "This is incredible," Hei-yun said, looking around with wide eyes. She saw houses made from gingerbread decorated with both Korean and Western designs. Some had roof tiles that looked like yacht, traditional Korean candy, while others had walls of chocolate and windows of hard candy. In the center of everything stood a grand palace. Its towers were made of crystal sugar that changed colors in the light. The walls were decorated with patterns that reminded Hei-yun of both Korean temples and European castles. As they walked toward the palace, Hei-yun saw dancers floating through the air. They wore beautiful costumes that combined traditional Korean hanbok with ballet tutus. Their movements created trails of sparkles in the air. Suddenly, the palace doors opened. A figure appeared, moving with grace and power. It was Myray, the sugar plum fairy. She wore a magnificent dress that seemed to be made from flower petals and morning frost. A crown of sugar crystals sat on her head. "Welcome, Hei-yun," Myray said in a voice that sounded like silver bells. "We have been waiting for you." "You have?" Hei-yun asked in surprise. Myray smiled warmly. "Of course. Every year, we choose one special child who truly believes in magic. This year, your grandmother Yu-jin told us about you." Jai-ho bowed to Myray. "She helped defeat Sang-min and his mouse army," he reported proudly. "She showed great courage." Myray clapped her hands, and suddenly the air filled with music. It was a beautiful blend of Korean traditional songs and classical Christmas music. The dancers in the air began to perform more complex movements. "Then we must celebrate," Myray declared. She waved her wand, and Hei-yun's winter pajamas transformed into a beautiful dress. It was pink like cherry blossoms, but sparkled like fresh snow. More magical beings appeared from the palace. There were chocolate soldiers who moved in perfect formation, sugar fairies who sprinkled sweet dust in the air, and candy makers who juggled colorful treats. "Tonight," Myray announced, "we will have a grand festival. We will show Hei-yun how Korean and Western magic work together to create something wonderful." The celebration began. Tables appeared, filled with treats from both cultures. There were plates of Korean ganjong and yakgwa next to Western cookies and cakes. Cups of sweet siki sat beside glasses of hot chocolate. Hei-yun watched in amazement as performers began to dance. Each performance told a different story about winter magic. Some dancers moved like snowflakes, others like winter winds. Their dances showed how different traditions could come together in perfect harmony. As the festival continued around her, Hei-yun felt completely at home in this magical place. She understood now why her grandmother had given her the Nutcracker. It wasn't just a Christmas decoration. It was a key to understanding how beautiful it was when different kinds of magic came together. The grand festival in the land of sweets continued with increasingly magical performances. Hei-yun sat on a crystal throne beside Myray and Jai-ho, watching the spectacular shows unfold before her. The first performance began with a gentle snowfall. Dancers dressed in white appeared, moving like delicate snowflakes. They spun and twirled, creating patterns in the air that turned into real ice crystals. The crystals caught the light and sent rainbow colors across the entire palace. "Each performance tells a story," Myray explained to Hei-yun. "Watch carefully, and you will see how winter brings magic to both Korea and New York." The next group of performers wore traditional Korean winter clothes. They danced with red silk ribbons that transformed into flying phoenix birds. The phoenixes soared through the air, leaving trails of golden light. When they touched the ground, beautiful winter flowers bloomed beneath them. Jai-ho stood up and raised his magical staff. "Now watch this," he said. The staff glowed with blue light, and suddenly the air filled with cherry blossom petals mixed with snowflakes. The combination created a beautiful storm of pink and white. Performers from New York City appeared next. They wore costumes that looked like the buildings Hae-yun knew from Manhattan. As they danced, their movements told the story of winter in the city. Their steps made sounds like taxi horns and subway trains, but instead of being noisy, it created wonderful music. "This is how we celebrate the magic that exists in both worlds," Mayray said. She waved her wand, and the palace walls became transparent. Through them, Hae-yun could see both New York City and scenes from Korea, all covered in magical winter snow. The festival reached its peak when all the performers came together. Korean dancers joined hands with New York dancers. The phoenixes flew alongside sugar plum fairies. Traditional Korean drums played together with classical Christmas bells. Everything moved in perfect harmony. Hae-yun watched in amazement as a giant Christmas tree grew in the center of the palace. But this was no ordinary tree. Its branches were made of crystal sugar, and instead of regular ornaments, it held memories. In each shining ball, Hae-yun could see winter celebrations from both Korea and New York. Every ornament shows a moment when someone discovered the magic of winter, Jai-ho explained. "Look there. That one holds the memory of your grandmother's first winter in New York." Hae-yun looked closely at one of the ornaments. Inside, she saw a younger version of Yoo-jin, standing in Times Square during her first snowfall in America. Her grandmother looked just as amazed then as Hae-yun felt now. The festival continued around them, filled with light and music. Candy makers created treats that tasted like happy memories. Sugar fairies sprinkled dust that made everyone feel the joy of both cultures coming together. As Hae-yun watched everything, she understood something important. The magic wasn't just in the spectacular shows or the amazing treats. It was in how different traditions could come together to create something new and wonderful. Just like her family celebrated both Korean and American holidays, this magical place showed how beautiful it was when different kinds of magic worked together. The night seemed to glow with endless possibilities, and Hae-yun knew she would never forget this magical celebration. As the magical festival began to slow down, Hae-yun noticed the stars in the sugar crystal sky starting to fade. A soft morning light appeared on the horizon, painting the land of sweets in gentle golden colors. Mayray approached Hae-yun with a serious look on her face. "Dawn is coming," she said softly. "And with it comes an important moment for you, dear Hae-yun." Jai-ho stood beside Mayray, holding his magical staff. "Every child who visits our world must make a choice when morning approaches," he explained. "You can choose to stay here in the land of sweets, where magic is always visible and winter dreams never end. Or you can return to your home in New York City." Hae-yun looked around at the wonderful world she had discovered. The palace still sparkled with sugar crystal lights. The dancers were still performing their beautiful movements in the air. The sweet smell of magical treats filled the air. "If I stay here," Hae-yun asked, "would I be able to see my family again?" Mayray smiled gently. "Your family could visit you in their dreams," she said, "but they wouldn't be able to see you in the real world anymore." Hae-yun thought about her parents at home. She thought about her grandmother Yoo-jin, who had given her the magical Nutcracker. She remembered all their family celebrations, mixing Korean traditions with their new life in New York. "Before you choose," Jai-ho said, "let me show you something important." He waved his staff, and the palace walls became like mirrors. In them, Hae-yun could see different scenes from her life. She saw herself helping her mother make kimchi in their kitchen. She saw her father teaching her to ice skate in Central Park. She saw her grandmother telling stories about Korea while they decorated the Christmas tree. These moments, Mayray explained, are their own kind of magic. They may not look as spectacular as our festival here, but they hold just as much wonder. Jai-ho nodded. "The real world has magic too," he said. It's in the way snowflakes fall on a quiet night. It's in the smile your grandmother gives you when she shares a special memory. It's in the way your family brings two cultures together every day. Hae-yun watched the scenes in the mirror walls. She saw how happy her family was together, how they created their own magic by sharing both Korean and American traditions. I think I understand now, Hae-yun said slowly. The magic isn't just in this beautiful place. It's everywhere, if you know how to look for it. Mi-rae touched Hae-yun's shoulder gently. That's right, she said. Some children choose to stay here because they can't see the magic in their own world. But you, Hae-yun, you already know how to find it. Hae-yun stood up straight and took a deep breath. She knew what she wanted to choose. The land of sweets was beautiful, but her heart told her where she truly belonged. I want to go home, she said firmly. I want to share the magic I've learned about with my family. Jae-ho and Mi-rae both smiled proudly. We knew you would make the right choice, Jae-ho said. The best magic is the kind you can share with others. Morning light streamed through the windows of the Park Avenue apartment. Hae-yun slowly opened her eyes, finding herself back in her own bed. The familiar sounds of New York City drifted up from the street below. For a moment, she lay still, remembering the magical journey of the night. The land of sweets, the beautiful festival, and her choice to return home all felt like a wonderful dream. She quickly got out of bed and hurried to the living room. The Christmas tree stood in its normal size, decorated with the ornaments she and her grandmother had hung together. Everything looked ordinary, yet somehow different. Hae-yun walked to the shelf where she had placed the Nutcracker the night before. He stood there in his blue uniform with Korean patterns, looking like a regular wooden figure. But something had changed. In his hand, she noticed a single cherry blossom petal, fresh and pink, even though it was the middle of winter. Good morning, Hae-yun, her grandmother Yoo-jin said, entering the room. Did you sleep well? Hae-yun turned to look at her grandmother, who had a knowing smile on her face. Grandmother, the Nutcracker. He was real, wasn't he? It wasn't just a dream. Yoo-jin walked over and picked up the cherry blossom petal from the Nutcracker's hand. Magic shows itself to those who are ready to see it, she said softly. Just like I saw it when I was your age. Hae-yun's parents came into the living room, carrying breakfast and excited to start opening presents. As they gathered around the tree, Hae-yun noticed things she hadn't seen before. The way the Christmas lights made patterns like the sugar crystal stars. How the ornaments caught the light just like the magical performances she had watched. Throughout Christmas Day, Hae-yun saw glimpses of magic everywhere. When snow started falling outside, each flake seemed to dance just like the performers in the land of sweets. The holiday treats her mother made reminded her of the wonderful festival foods. Even the sounds of the city seemed musical, like the harmony of Korean and Western celebrations she had experienced. That evening, as the family sat together enjoying hot chocolate and Korean sweet potato cookies, Hae-yun shared stories about Korean winter traditions she had learned from the magical world. Her parents listened with interest, and her father added his own memories of New York winter celebrations. Before bedtime, Hae-yun went to the shelf to look at her Nutcracker one last time. In the quiet moment, she whispered, "Thank you, Jae-ho." The Nutcracker's painted eyes seemed to twinkle in response. On the window behind him, frost patterns appeared, forming beautiful designs that mixed Korean and Western patterns. Hae-yun smiled, understanding that magic hadn't ended with her return. It had only changed shape. As she got ready for bed, Hae-yun heard her grandmother humming a melody that sounded just like the music from the land of sweets. Outside her window, the New York City lights sparkled through the falling snow, creating their own kind of magic. She now understood what Jae-ho and Mi-rae had meant. Magic wasn't just in grand festivals or spectacular performances. It lived in small moments, in family traditions, in the way her family brought together two different cultures. It was there in her grandmother's stories, in her mother's cooking, in her father's smile, and in the way New York City transformed during winter. Hei-yun fell asleep that night knowing that while her adventure in the land of sweets was over, her journey with magic was just beginning. After all, she now knew how to find wonder in both worlds, just like her Nutcracker prince had shown her.